Hi everyone. This video is part 3 out of 3 for module 2, which is about demand and supply. Now in the first part we talked about demand, in the second part we talked about supply, and for the third part we will talk about equilibrium. Market equilibrium happens when there is a balance in the supply and in the demand. When there is an excess in supply, a surplus happens, and when there is an excess in demand, there is a shortage. Okay, so now you see here a graphical illustration of the demand curve and the supply curve. The one that is downward sloping is demand curve, and the one that is upward sloping is a supply curve. And this is where they intersect. This is called the equilibrium point. So if you are going to identify the price that has been agreed on by the buyers and the sellers, the price is 25. And the quantity that has been agreed on by the buyers and the sellers is 8. That's the equilibrium quantity. Now, what about if we put our price at 30? And this is a bit higher, right, than 25. The law of demand is telling us that if you increase the price, there will be a drop in the quantity demanded. So let's try to check. Okay, so this is your demand curve, right? And right now, as the price goes up to 30, the QD drop to probably this is around 5.5, or let's say this is 5. Although technically it's not 5 because it's not perfectly between 4 and 6. But let's say that's 5. So the QD dropped from 8 to 5 when the price increased from 25 to 30. Now what about for the supply curve? Let's try to stretch this one, assuming that this is a linear curve. If the price is 30, the quantity demanded is more than, the quantity supplied rather, is more than 16. Probably this is 16.5. And we know already that that's what the law of supply is telling us. As the price increases, the quantity supplied will increase. So there is definitely, let's say this is 17, there is definitely uh, an increase in your quantity supplied, and there is a big difference between the QS and the QD at a price of 30. So QS is 17 while QD is just 5. So what happens? What situation do we see? We see here a surplus. The QS is greater than the quantity demanded at a price of 30. What about if we drop the price to around, let's say 22? Probably 22. At this price, or let's say that's 23. At this price, see here, see this one? At this price, the quantity demanded is 9, but the quantity supplied in the orange line or curve, the QS is just 4. So in this case, there is more QD compared to QS, 9 versus 4. So when QD is greater than the QS, we experience a shortage. So anything above the equilibrium point, there is a surplus. And anything below the equilibrium point, there is a shortage. Okay, now you see here that there are functions. Okay, this function and this function. If you have seen the video or the refresher video, you know that you can use the functions to find the equilibrium price and quantity. So you just basically have to equate the supply function to your demand function. So whatever your supply function is, for example, negative 42 million plus 2000 P is equal to, okay, 20 million 500,000. Okay, we're getting it from here, this and this. Okay, this is minus 500p. So equate. Okay, combine the 2000p and the 500p and combine this also, the whole numbers. Okay, transpose negative 500 to the left. You can transpose negative 42 million to the right, and the rest, you can solve for the rest. So by doing that, you will find the p. The p will be 25. Okay, maybe you can try to do that on your own, just to check if you still remember how to find the equilibrium price. Now, once you find the price of 25, let me just erase this one. Okay, once you compute for the price, which is 25, using the two equations, you can actually compute for the quantity, which is 8. How do you do that? Of course, you just simply have to replace P with 25, either in this equation or in this equation. Okay, or you can replace both P's with 25. And in both equations, in the right and in the left equations, it will give you an answer, which is 8, which is your equilibrium quantity. Okay, so again, if this seems like unfamiliar for you, please check our refresher video. Please remember that when there are shifts, when there is a shift in your demand curve to the right or to the left, there will be a change in the equilibrium. But if, let's say, for example, okay, so this is your demand curve, this is your supply curve. If there is a change in the QD or in the QS, a change in the QD would only mean changing from this point to this point. Okay? A change in the QS would only mean that the QS has moved from, let's say, this point to this point. So technically, if we are just talking about changes in QD and QS, there is no change in the point of intersection. The equilibrium point remains in this area. Okay? A change in QD only happens when there is a change in price. A change in QS also only happens if there is a change in the price. But when all the other factors change, then the movement will either be right or left in your demand and supply curve. So let's say that there's a change in the demand. Okay, not just change in QD, but change in demand. And the demand shifted, there's an increase in demand. So an increase in demand will be uh, illustrated by having a rightward shift in your demand curve. So that's a change in demand, an increase in demand. Oops. And what do you see? When you increase, or when you have an increase in your demand, a shift in your demand, there is a new equilibrium point. There is a new point at which the demand curve and the supply curve intersects. Okay? And let's say there is a change in your supply as well, and your supply increased. So an increase in the supply, okay, will cause a shift in your supply curve to the right. Okay, so let's just ignore this one. Let's say, okay, let me just repeat. This is the original supply curve, and this is the new demand curve. So let me label this as D sub 1. This is D sub 2. This is S sub 1 and S sub 2. So old demand curve, new demand curve, old supply curve, new supply curve. So when both the supply, okay, when both the supply curve and the demand curve shifted to the left, there is a new equilibrium point. Okay, so just remember that every time demand or supply shifts, a new equilibrium point is created. So with that, there will be a new equilibrium price, and there might be a new equilibrium price and quantity. So I'm just saying that there might be a new equilibrium price or equilibrium quantity, because when both curves shifts to the same or opposite direction, when both of them shifts, sometimes the change may become ambiguous. What do I mean by this? So just so I can illustrate this, again, forgive me if it doesn't look not nice. So this is your demand curve 1. This is your supply curve 1. So this is what I mean. If they both change either in the same or opposite direction, there is sometimes an ambiguity in some of the changes, like this one. Okay. Okay, let me just highlight the two equilibrium points. So notice that when you're looking at the quantity, where is the quantity? The quantity is here. The price is here. When you're looking at the quantity, definitely the quantity has moved from this point to this point. So there is an increase in the quantity. But if you take a look at the price, let's say this is 5, it doesn't seem like that the price has changed at all, right? Because they're in the same area. So it really depends on how big the change in your supply is or how big the change in your demand is. Because if I did it like this, okay, if I did it like this, what if I change, I move it to the right, but then the shift is just like very tiny shift. See? If that's a very tiny shift, now I can see that there really has been a change in the price. So the price has dropped. But when the shift is quite large, almost the same as the change in your supply from S1 to S2, then the change in the price is ambiguous. It's not clear. Okay? So you don't, again, this particular discussion is in the refresher video, but what I'm trying to point out here is that um, I've been saying a while ago that there might be a change. Okay, I use the word might, so I wasn't that absolute in saying that there will be a change because it really depends, especially if they both of the curves shifts. If they both shift to either to the right or to the left, or if they shift in opposite directions. But what we are absolutely sure is when only one curve, or if it's only the demand curve, or if it's only the supply curve shifts to the right or to the left, there will really be a change in your equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Okay. So you see here that there are 3 demand curves and there are also 3 supply curves. So let's just try to label them. So this will be D1, D2, D3. Okay. And the supply curves will be, the first one is S1, S2, and S3. So let's say if it's D1 and S1, so this is D1 and the S1 is right here, S1, this is the equilibrium point. So if it's only the demand curve that has shifted and the supply curve is as is, let's say this is still the supply curve, but then the demand curve has shifted to the right, then a new equilibrium point has been formed. Okay? So again, in this particular graph, it's just showing you that every time there is a shift in your demand or supply curve, um, please look out for the new intersection points because there might be changes in the equilibrium price and quantity. But if it's only the QD or QS that is changing, then there is no change because the movement is not right or left. The movement is from up, down, or down to up. Okay, so it's still the same equilibrium point. Now, market demand is the total demand. Demand differs among market segments, and in order to get the market demand, you just have to add the segment demand. Like for example, demand coming from the foreign market, okay, and domestic demand. So you add the two together to form the market demand, because there might be a different behavior. So why are you we are doing a market segmentation? Because probably there is a different behavior coming from the foreign market and from the domestic market. But if you're looking at the totality, the aggregate, you have the market demand. Okay, so that will be all for our second module, and thank you for watching. Please keep on reviewing.